conversation right now that's going to be on a topic that a lot of folks have been talking about for the last year and are going to continue to keep talking about into 2016 and going forward, which is this concept of the Internet of Things. This week at Next, one of the primary goals that we had was to provide a primer and education on some of the things that are going to be coming down the pipe in the next couple of years. And one of them that has been the most buzzy has been this whole notion of the Internet of Things. And so a quick primer or a little bit of background as to what the actual meaning or definition of the Internet of Things is. Wikipedia has it listed as just sort of a basic networking of all devices, but I think it's a lot more complex than that. What it is the effect of multiple economies of scale taking place. We've seen the decrease of cost on broadband internet happen rapidly in the last 24 months, in the last 5 years, to a point where it's become completely commoditized, so internet access has become very, very cheap. We've seen the same thing take place in terms of sensor technology and hardware to make it so that we're finding software chips and entire computers can now be generated or created at costs that are no more than a couple bucks now. Technology like beacon technology is also sort of pushing that. And what that's done has allowed entire new industries to start to evolve to take advantage of this perfect storm where devices or really any sort of appliance or any sort of physical object can now be connected to the internet. And that's leading to a lot of conversations and a lot of strategy thinking around what can we do with this from our perspective. And of course, for this audience, that perspective is going to be related to how do we engage consumers with their local business or their brand or their local neighborhood, their municipal government. And so what we wanted to do today was set the stage in terms of thinking about who are these businesses that are able to actually capitalize on the Internet of Things? What are they thinking about? And then take a applied look at one specific great example that's taking place at the municipal level that's highlighting many of these functions. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and just do a quick round of introductions here for our panelists, and then we're going to go ahead and kick right off. And so I want to make sure I get everything right here, so I wrote it down. So first we've got Dave Etherington, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Intersection. It's a technology and media company that's committed to improving the urban experience. And the company was founded as a merger of two other companies, Titan and Control Group. And their major project that they're working on right now is a quintessential Internet of Things project called Link NYC, which is being implemented in New York, and we're going to hear a little bit more about that in just a minute. And then with me, we've also got Andy Narana, I wanted to make sure I got that, who is the Director of Digital Transformation at Cisco, as well as Senior Research Fellow at the Global Center for Digital Business Transformation, which is a joint effort by IMD and Cisco. It's like a think tank to think about business disruption as well as business models going into the future. And so with that, I'll just kick it right into the first question, which I wanted to sort of set the stage with, which is, that what we've been seeing is that in this Internet of Things explosion, that we're finding that by the very nature of it, that it's a disruptive element to the world of business at large, as well as to organizations that want to take advantage of it. And so we hear this word disruption happen or come up so often, but I wonder if there's some context that you can perhaps apply to thinking about what does it really mean to be a disruptor? And when you think about these massive market changes and massive market sort of shifts, what are some of the traits or the characteristics that are sort of bubbling up? And Andy, I'll start with you.
Sure, so thank you. So first of all, at Cisco at least, when we think about the Internet of Things, we actually call it the Internet of Everything. Okay. And so we expect that by 2020, there are going to be 50 billion devices connected to the Internet. And it's not just your phone or there's always sort of like people think about the connected refrigerator or toaster, but think about all the places you can embed a sensor you can essentially draw intelligence from. It's essentially anything, right? And so the things are just part of it. It's just the beginning. Things that are connected by themselves are useless because all you have is data, right? We also bring in our definition, data, process, and people. So once you connect the things, right, you have all of this valuable data, and then ultimately you would normally take that data and turn it into insight, and then use that insight to change a process. Right? You're going to re-engineer processes, or if you're a startup, you're going to create some new value-creating process that you can go and use to disrupt a market. And then finally, people, right? That's often the forgotten component in this whole thing. We actually find that people are the most valuable part of the Internet of Things. So I just wanted to sort of set that context. Sure. It's not just about the things.
That makes sense.
Now, when talking about disruption, we spent at the Center for Digital Business Transformation, we spent about the last 6 months looking at disruption, how industries are being reshaped, and what these disruptors are doing, right? How are they going and attacking markets? And so when we talk about digital disruption, again, it's not just the technology, it's a combination of technology and business model. So you have to look at it from a holistic perspective. So I just wanted to provide these definitions.
Sure.
And then just show a few things. I'm going to scroll through here. One thing that I think it's important to know is that this is going to be a huge disruptive force in every market. So we looked at 12 different industries, and we asked the executives in these industries, what do you think the change is going to be in your industry to the top 10 market incumbents? On an average, they felt that 4 of the top 10 incumbents would be displaced. So think about that. Out of the top 10 market shareholders in their industries, I think 4 are going to be gone. And in fact, 40% of these companies thought that there was a significant threat of existential threat, right? They actually might be put out of business, and that's in 36 months. So we're not talking about 5 years or 10 years down the road. We're talking about 3 years or a matter of months.
So that's incredible, you know, and we used to think about material organizational change as something that was slow moving. And it seems like technology has effectively made it so that, well, the combination of the technology plus the sort of the items that you sort of including people, have made it so that this is becoming much more rapid. But at the same time, there's been some, in terms of shifting of systems themselves, there's been some like the payphone that really, and this is going to be just an example just to get into Dave's conversation here, that's been waiting to be replaced. And it seems like we're at a place now where we're able to actually provide a valuable replacement for it. And Dave, can you tell us a little bit more about Link NYC and sort of how it's becoming the quintessential Internet of Things for the government type service?
Sure. So I don't know if any of you have been to New York in the last 40 years. I'm sure most of you have. There are 7.5 old payphones right across the 5 boroughs, 7,500 old payphones spread right across the 5 boroughs, which really aren't being used for phone calls. They generate some advertising revenue. And I think by and large, everybody from the city to businesses have seen these payphones as really an aging infrastructure of technology that needs updating. So actually, that's exactly what we're doing. Link NYC is a project to replace every single one of those 7,500 payphones and replace them with new link structures. I may have some images here in the slide. I don't know.
I'm not sure if they were actually loaded in this one.
Oh,
so,
there are no images in this slide, so I'll do my best to describe it with words. So rather than a messy old payphone, beautifully designed, 10-foot tall kiosks, there are something like 3.5 million people in New York without access to broadband internet, which is a shocking figure. And so Link NYC really is a project to bridge that digital divide. We are bringing free up to gigabit speed Wi-Fi right across the 5 boroughs. As I said, 10,000 relatively evenly distributed nodes. Access to city services, local search, wayfinding listings, all understanding their exact microlocation. People can make phone and video calls from these things. And also, we think, and we're working very closely with the City of New York, there's potential here for these to be a great repository for data. And so there's going to be, again, with the input from the City of New York, there's going to be an array of sensors, up to 60 sensors in each of these things, which will give us an unparalleled understanding of what makes the city tick, from air quality, noise, congestion, etc. But really, as you say, from an Internet of Things perspective, it provides a framework and a backbone of gigabit speed connectivity, which can then help leverage an Internet of Things city where tens of millions of devices can connect, streetlights can be responsive, and fast forward in a couple of years with the new Wi-Fi protocols in every new car coming out, with vehicle-to-vehicle, vehicle-to-infrastructure Wi-Fi, suddenly you can have a city that responds to its inhabitants, that evolves as quickly as its inhabitants do. And also, you talked about that explosion in data needs. There is an enormous pressure on cities at the moment through mass migration, data needs. Link NYC, I think, is a great response to that, where we kind of help fast forward New York and put it on the track to become a smarter, more responsive city.
And so one thing that came to mind when I was thinking about Link NYC and just sort of the way that IoT thinking is sort of entering into the marketplace, one of the things that I found is smart cities and smart roads and projects like Link NYC seem to be the ones that are sort of taking traction the fastest. There are solutions in the market right now that sort of tie into the IoT world in that tie into the local world as well, like Amazon's Echo or beacon technology for retailers to be able to do retargeting at the physical level. But for the most part, it seems like the real disruption is probably taking place more in the municipal and the government level at this point. And it seems like businesses that are for profit or they're trying to make products for the market are taking a little bit more time. Do you think that that's a symptom, or that the reason for that is because governments have to be disruptive in order to get this technology out there? Or is there a difference between the way a municipal organization would think versus a business in terms of transformation?
Well, I mean, from what we see, we actually see innovation in all industries,
okay,
and occurring at a rapid pace. I think for public sector, one thing that we found is one of the challenges is the complexity, right? You have so many, first of all, with the solutions themselves, moving parts that you have to bring together. And then obviously in the public sector, there are a lot of other challenges, right, around what the citizens want, politics, like all sorts of things, right? So those are, I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, and we're just seeing the beginning. In terms of the private sector, I think that's something that is an advantage, is it's essentially greenfield opportunity for many of these startups, right? If you're an incumbent, you have a lot of business processes to change, you have a lot of things to deal with, but we are seeing a lot of rapid innovation in the private sector just because there's so much opportunity to create something from scratch. And the cost of sensors is coming down, the amount of processing power and analytics power that you have at your fingertips really is increasing. And really, in many cases, the limitation is the skill set, right? Can you get the people to help you create these new innovative things?
I think just to add to that, I think what municipalities are finding is that they have this infrastructure and they have this real estate that previously was seen in quite a one-dimensional way, and that through technology and through public-private partnerships, they can now reinvent this type of thing, as we're seeing with the payphones, but it might as well be bus shelters, it could be billboards on the side of the street. Wherever there is real estate, there's potential to kind of reimagine that real estate and bring value, bring technology, and the Internet of Things.
And do you think that the ability for public sector as well as for the companies that work with the public sector, there seems to be a need to sort of have this period where there's a learning process to figure out, what does it actually take in order for a link NYC or a link itself within the city to be not only useful but engaged with in terms of both the public as well as the businesses that are going to be around it. Do you have to come into this with a background on thinking about the different types of thinking, like marketing and advertising and logistics and actual public city planning? Do you have to put all that together, or is there sort of a core mission and then you kind of wait to see what's going to happen from there?
No, I think we have to put it all together. And Intersection is a fairly unique organization. It's a technology and media company, which, as you mentioned before, is the coming together of two separate companies led by an investment from Google's Sidewalk Labs, which is their urban innovation new wing. And so we have a spread of expertise and knowledge that we can bring to bear for a project like Link NYC. And our focus really is on three distinct areas, which is, civic, commerce, and community. We have to think about each of those areas and make sure that we bring value to each of those. And if we do, then the Link NYC project will be a success. It's a 15-year contract with the City of New York, at least a 15-year contract. And so we're building something that we know will evolve over time. We know will adapt through various software and hardware updates. So yeah, we're constantly thinking about the use cases. We're constantly listening to the way people will use it and respond to it, and the platform will adapt and grow.
So, interesting point you bring up, which is that there has to, with the 15-year agreement, it sort of implies that there has to be a long-term thinking and a long-term strategy to making sure that the efficacy of this entire initiative is going to sort of work. In terms of this audience here, they're looking at the world from the perspective of they've got an organization that is probably going to touch against either the worlds of brands, the worlds of franchises, small businesses themselves, or their resellers that take different products and solutions and take them to the marketplace. And so they're constantly thinking about, well, I've got my portfolio of solutions, but there's other things that are coming into the market. So I mean, beacons, again, I'm just going to harp on that for a second. Everyone's wondering, well, how do I think about beacons, and who do I need to work with in order to sort of make sure that I have the right technology as part of our solution package? When it comes to what Dave mentioned in terms of the long-term strategy and approach that's required for a lot of these hardware companies that are going to start to emerge, How are they thinking about their ability to service their marketplace when they know that there's a long ramp that's required for a particular type of product or service to really take hold? How do you survive in that sort of thinking?
Well, I think one thing that we see with a lot of these disruptors is that they think about the value and not the value chain.
Okay.
Right, and so if you are in an industry and you sort of have been in the industry a long time, take the oil and gas industry, right, as an example. There's a certain value chain, exploration, production, refining, marketing, right? But now we see disruptors coming into a lot of these industries where there's a value chain, and essentially what they're looking to do is strip out the digital component of the industry. Uber, right, great example. It's not a taxi cab company. I mean, there's so many examples of this where they don't hold the physical assets, right? They are taking the digitizable part and creating a lot of value with just that part. And so I guess one thing is, if you were to think about it, maybe you should reconsider what some of your traditional partners or your value chain looks like, right? Maybe take a step back and rethink that, because you might come up with new and innovative ways to create value outside of your traditional value chain. Something else, we took a look at several hundred of these disruptors, and another thing that we found is that they're pursuing something called combinatorial disruption. And essentially, they're combining three types of value in new and innovative ways. Excuse me. The first is cost value, so the ability to provide customers with greater value for the dollar they spend or the euro they spend. The second is experience value, so basically reinventing the customer experience. And the third is platform value, right? So it's creating a platform in which you can connect buyers and sellers and then build on that platform. And what we found is that the most successful disruptors, they're not doing just one of those things. They're combining those three types of value in new and innovative ways. And I think Tesla is a great example, right? Tesla provides, if you're a Tesla owner, you get cost value because you don't have to buy gasoline. You get a free, upgrades of your car overnight, essentially. Experience value, the car itself, but then the concierge service, there are a number of other things. And then platform value. I mean, look, they're looking to replace gas stations. Think about that. That's really a platform play, if not anything else, right? And so that's an example of a company that's really combined things using combinatorial disruption. And so that's the second thing. I mean, maybe just two things is reconsider your value chain, and then look at ways you can create value in these new and innovative ways.
The cost, experience, and platform value is exactly what I think of when I think about Link NYC and what it's bringing to the cities that it's being, or Link in general, where it's bringing to the cities it's being incorporated into. Is that part of the sort of broader thinking that you guys had when it came time to think about how do we create an implementation that's actually going to take hold? Or does it sort of happen backwards and organically, where you sort of just took the need of the city to be able to become smart, to be able to provide Wi-Fi, to provide access to information, and that by the nature of your work sort of feeds into what Andy's talking about in terms of a successful disruptor?
Well, I think our approach was, it was an open RFP process to take over this payphone franchise, a competitive process. And going into it, our whole focus was just on creating the best possible product for the people of New York. And then give it away for free. So, we didn't have to bring gigabit speed Wi-Fi, we didn't have to bring free phone calls, free video calling, but we realized that the more value you can bring, the more people will use it, the more they will allow you to access some of their data, albeit in an anonymized and aggregate way, which is then useful to help keep the system running, as well as monetizing it through advertising.
So, and that's interesting that you're going to have with the links a brand new way to create advertising, or a brand new market to create advertising. And that's something that a lot of folks in this room are probably going to be really interested in, is where do we have new markets to be able to provide exposure to our ad portfolio? And that's a very business-centric and very, there's a particular profit oriented to that. That's the reason why we're doing this. But the democratization of all this hardware, all this data, the internet access itself, what it seems to be allowing for is a lot of other loose type projects in the marketplace, which are more consumer oriented. I want to wax poetic for just a bit here in terms of just some other devices that we're seeing in the consumer marketplace, like the Roomba vacuum, the robotic vacuum, and its internet connectivity means that you can sit in your cubicle and set your vacuum on, so when the company comes over, you're already cleaned house. But again, it had a very explosive explicit purpose that led to it. I wonder, and Mandy, I'll start with you on this, in terms of the fact that everything's become so commoditized, and you just mentioned the cost experience and platform value being so essential, we're going to probably find that there's going to be some drifters in terms of businesses that emerge that aren't going to really find success in terms of Internet of Things thinking because they're not going to have one of those three sort of elements. Is that a sort of an expected process as new technology emerges, and is this sort of just the way this things works, or is this a function of IoT?
Well, I think, yeah, of course, you're going to have winners and losers. And I think with IoT solutions in particular, it's something that's relatively new. And therefore, if you don't get the value proposition right, your chances are less of succeeding. However, I think, again, going back to it's not just the things, I think where you're going to see a lot of potential success is the data. And this is an area, if you think about what's happening in machine learning, artificial intelligence, where having connected thing was probably the small part of the value proposition. But we're starting to see some interesting examples in the retail space, for instance, with a company called Donde, which was started by, I believe, a couple of ex-Israeli military officers, or Sentient, which is the most well-funded artificial intelligence startup. They've tied up with shoes.com that allow essentially a completely new way of searching for products, right? You don't have to, for instance, if you're looking for a pair of shoes, there are only so many characteristics that you can Google for, right? Or type in, and maybe black or so forth. However, there's thousands of other characteristics that a machine can pick up on and present you proactively with something that matches what you want, right? And so I think you're going to start to see a lot of combination of Internet of Things, and you're going to see the proliferation of sensors everywhere, but you're going to see a lot of these data-driven capabilities. I mean, what happens when you step into your car in the morning and your car knows what mood you're in, right? What are the possibilities there? There's all sorts of value we haven't thought of, and it's going to be risky. It's definitely going to be risky because a lot of these things are going to fall on their face because people don't see the value. But I do think there are going to be some winners there, and it's going to be things that we haven't even thought of today, right? It's going to be.
And it seems like data has a lot to do with who might the winners be. And with the links, there's going to be a whole set of data that's going to be very hyper-targeted and hyper-local that you guys are going to be able to do things with. And are there thoughts as to how that might be leveraged?
Absolutely. And again, we're working on that data platform with the City of New York. There are a host of ways it could be leveraged, and our thinking around it is that it will be essentially an open data platform, and so it will surface some really interesting insights that we think about, the developer ecosystem or kids in schools in hackathons being able to kind of take on some of the challenges that New York faces and create apps and solutions for it. From an advertising perspective, it might give us the ability to change advertising based upon, micro conditions, changes in audience demographics. So what you get is this web-like responsiveness of advertising, but transposed to physical spaces, which is really interesting because you have, proximity to retail and physical retail dwarfs e-commerce by 10 to 1. So there's a real opportunity there. So you used the word before, democratizing the city, and I think that's right. I think certainly from a local advertising perspective, it creates a more egalitarian approach, rather than trapping people inside a loop for 4 weeks, which is typically the way digital out-of-home works. We'll allow smaller local advertisers to participate in much smaller increments of time, much like buying ads online, all driven by data insights, so they can really figure out how to buy the right audience at the right time in the right space.
So the other side of the coin on that brave new world, which sounds amazing because I get to see exactly whatever ads I want as I'm walking down the street or at a link, is privacy. And I wonder, as we have the Internet of Everything and sensors on everything and the data being collected on everything, that at some point we just need to make sort of a decision that says that privacy doesn't exist in the way that we expected it to in the last 100, 200 years. Is that something that plays into the thinking around how we move forward as an industry or as a market? And do we still worry about privacy? Because I know that in 2015, a lot of folks raised a lot of alarms, but really nothing came out of that except for just the opt-in story, really. And so I wonder, what is the state of privacy going into all this? And Andy, I'll maybe start with you.
Well, we do a lot of work in the area of the workforce. And just as in the consumer markets, there's a lot of innovation happening in terms of how you can understand your employee base. And when we talk about this, it's interesting because we get completely different reactions about privacy when we speak in Europe versus North America. So first of all, I think there's going to be, obviously geographic difference in terms of what's acceptable, what's, what people accept with regards to their privacy. I think one challenge is the complexity. right? Especially when you get into IoT solutions, it's very difficult to understand what sort of information you're giving up, and what sort of information is being captured about you without you even knowing, right? If you walk in and there's a camera, or somebody's doing speech analytics on what you're saying, you don't even know. But I think in terms of what you have control over, there's definitely has to be a value proposition for the consumer, right? I, as a consumer, want to know that if I'm giving up something, I'm getting something.
Get something back in return.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And despite the kind of deafening silence following Edward Snowden, and people really not seeming to care, it would seem. I expected, cars upturned in the streets.
Kim Kardashian was on TV that night, so.
Right. But I think it's very important that we have a transparency around the value proposition to consumers. What is it that they're getting and what is it they're giving up? And the privacy policy we worked on with the City of New York is actually incredibly rigorous. They asked us to find the best privacy policy for public Wi-Fi and make it better. And that's what we did. It's a really kind of citizen-first policy that's been very clear. And actually, we don't need much data in the first place, unlike people getting their Wi-Fi at home, where you'll need to give your provider a credit card, your social security number, your address, your phone number. We just need a name and an email address. So everything is anonymized, everything is aggregated, and we don't have that much data in the first place.
And then it's based on geographies and the sentiments of the communities. I think we had a question from the audience. Charlie?
There's one question that came in through the mobile app, and it's for Dave. You referenced sensors previously. Do you mean beacons for Link NYC? And can you expand on what will be included in the kiosks?
Sure. So from the sensor the sensor array that we're considering for Link NYC would be a combination of air quality, vibrations, really microphones, an understanding of congestion, micro weather conditions, air quality, noise, laboring vehicles, all that kind of stuff. We haven't yet made a decision about beacons, but having said that, we're very proactive and for beacons. I think they provide a really useful utility from a proximity service. For example, with Link evenly distributed right across the city, you can imagine creating an app for the visually impaired to allow them to navigate their way around the city in ways that were previously unimaginable, real utility. Each Link, so to answer the second part of that question, each Link will have an Android-like tablet, and that's the place where you make phone calls, video calls. There is QuickTime charger, USB chargers, 2 of them on each device, accessing 911, 311, etc. And really a platform for innovation. So people can write apps to that tablet.
Great. It looks like we're just out of time. Was there any more questions, Charlie? I didn't want to. Okay, great. I was going to end it with something lighthearted, and I was going to ask just the typical question of, do you own any IoT devices? But at this point in 2015, I think everyone owns at least 3 or 4. So I'm going to ask, what is your favorite IoT device that you've been using?
I'm probably a little bit more addicted to them than I should be, but I'm really into those Nest home cameras.
Do they really make that much of a difference?
They do. As you may have noticed from my accent, I'm not from around here. And
really?
I still have my flat in London, although I lived in New York for the last 8 years. So I've got a few cheekily positioned cameras in there to make sure no one breaks in.
That's interesting. And Andy, for you?
For me, it's probably the Echo, the Amazon Echo. I think Alexa is now part of our family.
Wow.
And if you look at what it's being asked, it's pretty much tell me a joke, tell me a joke, tell me a joke, with my kids all day. So.
And that's probably, for me, it's either the Echo or the Roomba. Less cleaning for me is wonderful. But with that, thank you so much again to our panel, and we're going to be moving on to Charlie.